Okay, I'd like to introduce Malcolm Myers, who's the founder and CEO of European Internet Ventures. Malcolm, works with portals and marketplaces around the world to raise capital and conduct M&A activities, and as such is extremely well placed to provide very good insights into what is happening with key trends in the industry. So I'd now like to hand over to Malcolm to talk about how he sees value creation in a new world.
Thank you, Simon. So yes, I'm Malcolm Myers. I've been for 12 years working in classifieds and marketplaces, originally at NASPA's running M&A of Vice Scout, and I run a company called EIV that is a specialist advisory firm doing capital raising and M&A for online classifieds and marketplaces. And although we've called European Internet Ventures, we work everywhere in the world. I'd like to tackle the subjects in three sections. First of all, has the classifieds growth engine stalled? Which is the right model? Is it classifieds, marketplace, or platform? And what are the paths to value creation that many of you as experienced classifieds operators might be able to take? Well, I think it's fair to say that even before COVID-19 struck, the rates of revenue growth, even amongst the most successful verticals in the world, like RIA or Auto Trader UK, had started to slow. And I would expect that that slowing to continue to happen, especially for 2020. But if we ask ourselves, why is it slowing? When we look at the amount of revenues that these companies are able to generate, it actually is still quite a small percentage of the commission of the intermediaries, those real estate brokers, those car dealers who are using the platforms. Again, Auto Trader, very successful in the UK. My guess that they're getting about $90 to sell a car, that's getting about a $1,200 commission. And similarly, in Rightmove in the UK, it's getting about $125 per listing on average, but an agent, if that's a sales listing, is getting $4,000. So only 3% of that is going to Rightmove. And I think to understand why this is the case, we have to think that the actual classifieds proposition is somewhat living off a broken consumer experience. If we think about buying a phone on Amazon, it's that wonderful, smooth process that we've all seen from finding what you want to do, transacting, and paying on platform. If you think how classifieds works, if, for example, you want to buy a car on classifieds, once you've found a car that looks interesting, the classified platform is pushing you off the platform to call the dealer, who may or may not eventually end up wrapping up the sale in usually a fairly lengthy offline process. I'd argue further that classifieds' dependence upon intermediaries looks even more precarious now than it did before. Either high-cost, high-street agents is an economically challenging model. They have, and also with COVID-19, they have fewer opportunities for face-to-face contact with potential vendors or buyers to justify the fees they charge. They're also under margin pressure from some of these online brokers, which we're going to talk about more. And similarly, car dealers, does it still make sense to have expensive forecourts with large amounts of stock? Is that the business model that will help fuel further revenue growth for companies like Auto Trader? If we take a look back at how classifieds has evolved over the past decade or so, I think there's been a clear progression from simple listings businesses like Craigslist to then adding value-added services and depth products like promotional features, market insights, efficiency tools. And now most players are focused on 3.0, which is where they're trying to make money around the transaction in some of these more, I would say, more competitive areas like vehicle loans, mortgages, and insurance. Very, very few have gone all the way to actually being in the center of the transaction, actually themselves selling and buying. Interestingly enough, the markets which we're all operating in are vast, right? If you think of, these are just rough estimates, if you think of the brokerage revenues that you could get in the US, there's about 77 billion available and about 33 billion equivalents in Europe. If you think about home rentals, there's about a $12 billion commission pool to fight for as a platform, and used car sales around 25 billion, both in the US and Europe. So it's not surprising to hear that an awful lot of capital has been raised. I'm talking about private capital has been raised to help address these opportunities. And of course, most of this capital isn't going into classifieds, it's going into models which in some respect compete with classifieds models. If you can see on the left-hand side, for example, the blue bars reflect tech-enabled brokerages and iBuyer models in the US. And the pale bars on the right-hand side, you can see what's been going on in China, where $3+ billion has been invested in what I would call curated, almost industrialized rentals platforms, which covering thousands and thousands of units. Interesting enough, rentals marketplaces has hardly received any investment at all. Similarly, automotive, $21 billion raised there, over half of it in China. And in fact, that pale bar right in the middle is for car buying platforms. So these are platforms where a consumer is selling their car to the platform and other consumers are buying cars from the platform. These, of course, are not using intermediaries. And this has been by far the biggest source of capital. For example, companies like Yuxin, Renren in China. And of course, you'll know in the US, Vroom and Carvana as being active in that space. Interestingly, the European money, much less, but has gone into the Auto One model, which is a brokerage model, selling cars, buying cars and selling them onto brokerages. So that's a bit of background. Now, I'd like to explore a little bit which is the right model to adopt to better exploit these huge market opportunities. So if we look at classifieds, and let's start, I'm going to go through 3 different options, but if we start about selling a home, we're all familiar with the classifieds model, which of course is many to many. It's about generating leads for intermediaries and the players you're all familiar with already. But what about marketplace? Let's be clear, a marketplace is a many-to-many platform where the transaction is actually made on that platform. It's actually very hard to think of a true marketplace for real estate sales. The ones that come to my mind are companies like auction.com in the US, Tapu in Turkey. These are auctions typically selling properties owned by institutions. They could be repossessed homes, selling them after being viewed online or physically. The platform play, I think, is better known, especially in the US, of course, because of the iBuyer model. The platform model, of course, is many individuals basically selling to one platform. Now, if we think about the consumer experiences between these 3 different models, I would argue that the iBuyer model is a wonderful experience if you're selling a home. If you think about it, that home is going to be sold without you having to stay at your home. Most of that process will be run by the platform in a semi-online way. But it's not a mainstream model. Most people don't get an offer for their homes when they want to list it on an iBuyer model. Whereas classifieds, we've also talked about the problems with classifieds. So in my view, we are yet to see today the right model for buying and selling real estate. Let's look at renting a home. For example, again, classifieds is well known, but what's very interesting is outside of the US, there are actually very few platforms which are rental specific. In Europe, if you want to rent an apartment, you tend to go on a generalist classified site, or you'll be listed on a site with for sales listings. US has a Zumper, an apartments list. Interesting enough, marketplace is something which is beginning to happen in rentals. And I'm thinking, so again, this would be a platform where you can actually click a button and the tenant can actually form a contract with the landlord or that landlord's agent. The best examples I can think of in Europe are Spot a Home and Open Rent. I haven't yet found an example in the US. And there's a Chinese platform called Zerum that's also active in this space and in the platform space. And the platform one is, I think, area which probably needs a bit more attention. So again, these are platforms which will actually manage the relationship with the tenant. The tenant's not going to transact with the landlord, and often the landlord has already sublet their home to the platform. This means the platform can offer a much more consistent and much more end-to-end controlled process. There are examples throughout the world here. There's Bungalow and Sonder in the US, Residently in the UK and US, and in China, there's again Zerum that's active in both of these verticals, and Dankra Pumps, which is actually a quoted entity. So I personally love the idea of, on an app, having sufficient detailed content, 360 video tours and so on, that I can actually see what I'm about to rent, the tools to actually rent it on the app, as well as an interface for dealing with in-life maintenance and when things go wrong and so on. So if we compare these three models, you can see more value is added at each layer. The classifieds are adding the least value, marketplace more, and the rentals platforms the most. And then we ask ourselves, are the people offering more value also making more EBITDA? And of course, currently the reverse is true. So whereas the classifieds guys are making, this is approximation, but classified sites make about 75% EBITDA margins when they're working properly. So a classified site might be making $15 in EBITDA. A rentals marketplace will be getting a much more at the top end, maybe 8% of a rental fee, but they're going to be spending sometimes over $200 to acquire that tenant, plus more for the landlord. I've had the chance of looking at some of these businesses. Today, with tens of thousands of customers, they are rarely able to make money, and maybe in time could be making 100 euros or $100 per listing. And then if you think of the rentals platforms, they tend to rent for longer term, they do more, they get a higher take rate, but they also have the same issue, these hugely high tenant acquisition costs. And also they have additional costs for refurbishment and maintenance. So while currently they're not profitable, in fact, we can see, for example, Danker Apartments in China lost $650 per unit last year, and they're renting out hundreds of thousands of units. But in time, I would argue this model could become very profitable, and $200 per client EBITDA compared to 15 is something worth paying attention to. Let's then look at the car business. So again, if you want to buy a used car, you go on classifieds. We all know how that works, and the players are famous throughout the world. What's less well known again is marketplace. Where the marketplace is where I can click a button and actually actually buy that car alive. The example that came to my mind is actually eBay, and there's also a French company called Capcar that I'll talk about a bit more. And then the third version, again, the platform version, platforms that are buying cars and then selling them on, that's the Carvanas and the Vrooms of this world. So this is an example of trying to buy a car on eBay. There's I can click a button now and spend $20,000 and get this nice BMW 3 Series, but it's only got 6 photos, there's no inspection, no warranty. How likely am I actually to take the plunge? Here is an example of, let's call it a modern new way of selling a car. The Kazoo is the UK's equivalent of Carvana, although much smaller today. You have cars which have been inspected, you can buy them entirely online, have them delivered to your home. Quality is ensured, you can send it back within a few days if you don't like it, and it's got a warranty attached to it. That, I think, is the future experience that more and more customers are expecting to get. So here again, I compare and contrast the value of the classifieds player and the value of the platform. And again, same as with real estate, right? The platform is offering much more value, but today, who's making the most EBITDA? And I think, again, it's clear that the models today have very different economics. Auto Trader UK, phenomenally successful. My calculations are they're making perhaps $116 in EBITDA out of maybe a little bit, $160 of revenues per car listed. Carvana, huge, very successful, listed, but although they're making $2,800 on average in gross profit per car, they're spending $1,000 just to find a buyer for that car, plus their additional costs for refitting the car or for inspecting it. They're actually losing over $1,300 per car at a volume of 180,000 cars per year. They expect to become profitable in time, and over time could indeed be making over $2,000 in EBITDA. But my key point is, without the liquidity that a classified site has, it's much harder work for them to get to scale at an acceptable cost. So now let's take a look at some of the different ways that classifieds players, with the huge benefits you have as a classifieds platform in terms of leads, listings, traffic, client base, what you could do to play and perhaps emulate some of the benefits of the marketplaces and platforms which I have been referring to. So let's again look at home sales first. I look at 3 different versions. Classifieds 3.0 is the first one, so that's classified today, but taken one step further. I think there's some new services you could think about offering. virtual tours, but perhaps also a house survey and conveyancing marketplace on a commission basis. But I think even more or more exciting than that is getting involved in the fintech dimension. If you think of the possibility to bridge fund a home by who needs to sell their home before they can buy one, we'll give them the bridge so that they can buy their home first and break a chain. This is companies like Ribbon or Orchard in the US, or give customers the opportunity to first rent a home, and then when they've saved up or paid enough rent, it can then become a mortgage solution. That's, for example, Divvy Homes in the US. So my suggestion to look at is considering adopting some of these models as a classifieds player. Well, you'll say we do listings, we don't do financial risk management, but you've got so much data from looking at the market and tracking the market for years. I think combined with the right financial partners, you could go a long way in this direction. And clearly the revenue upside would be dramatic compared to pure listings business. Let's look secondly at the second model. I've called it Shopify. As many of you will know, Shopify basically enables a simple retailer to offer a full online store capability with baskets and payment. So let's think of the parallel in real estate sales. Why couldn't a platform, a classifieds player today, build some of that transaction facilitating infrastructure to deal with contracts, the movement of contracts, the movement of authentication and payment, the project management involved in securing a home sale? Why couldn't they offer that, but as a branded or co-branded service with the dealers, with the real estate agents or brokers? That means that each broker could offer on their website a kind of deal room and facilitate the transaction process on behalf of their clients without themselves having to invest heavily in this infrastructure. The role of the agent would be unchanged. They'd still bring the seller mandate and so on, but they benefit from a more digitized process. And if you look carefully, this is already happening in some parts of the world. I know in Europe, for example, Pronto Piso in Spain is offering a similar service to this, and One Dome in the UK also is offering elements of this service already today. The third version, the third option, is the more extreme and the most disruptive of them all. It's called own label tech-enabled brokerage. Here, as a classifieds player, you could set up your own additional real estate agent along the lines of a Purplebricks or a Compass in the US, where you would manage those sales yourselves. Now, can I do that while I still have agents as clients? My view is you can, as long as you brand it differently and continue to care for those agents with the right amount of leads. Secondly, let's look at home rentals. So here again, there's a Classifieds 3.0 option to digitally enable those listing sites today. Maybe with you could offer virtual tours, tenant passports, deposit insurance, which is obviously a lot of friction when a tenant wants to move in, facilitate those transactions. So allow the role of the agents to still bring leads and to bring the listings to you, but make that overall process when the tenant wants to move ahead a much smoother one, and therefore get more of that transaction rather than just the listing fee. I think there's probably a 2.0 version of this, which would be more advanced, which I've called the rentals marketplace, where landlords can transact directly with tenants on the platform. Today, we have companies like Spot a Home or Quinto Andar in Brazil that are doing this. So the marketplace is getting the leads from the landlords of the places to rent. They're finding their tenants. They're matching the two up on their platform. Is there still a role for agents in this world? I'm personally not sure that there is, in the long term, a big role for agents in rentals. But I think, at least in the short to medium term, those agents are very good people to bring those listings onto the site in return for a commission share. And that's exactly what companies like Quinto Andar or Aptuno in Latin America are up to. Finally, let's look about automotive. Classifieds 3.0, I'm really excited about inspections and warranties. I think if you want to get more money out of a consumer seller, then that's the kind of thing you should be offering them. You can brand it with your site. There's a company in China called Chimayo, which does exactly this. And then you might be able to get a commission or a model attached to this, and or in addition to offering that kind of inspection and warranty service. Much more revenue than a simple listings model, in my view. The second model is the Shopify model, where similar to real estate, you could operate that infrastructure to allow dealers to operate an online buying and selling of homes. And the third option, I think, is you could run your own tech-enabled dealership, where again, you would acquire the listings from private sellers directly, inspect, and then you would find the buyers and bring them together. I'm not saying you need to own cars, buy inventory like Carvana, that's a capital intensive model, but you could intermediate that transaction and get a commission share rather than simply a listing fee. There's a company in France called Capcar that's doing this today, but they don't have the benefit of the huge liquidity which you guys do. So very quickly, can this happen? Well, it's happened in other places. It's happened in food retailing, where a supermarket has its own brand next to branded goods. And of course, Amazon is selling their own Amazon products, that same smartphone, next to those of other people. So I would conclude that for classifieds players, a continued focus on lead gen and ancillaries is probably not going to get you to those revenue expectations which investors have, and that to reignite growth, classifieds players will need to evolve much more into partnership plays, in fintech, and in providing more of the core transaction elements themselves. And I think that the meaningful upside to your business could be worth the risks of defecting one or two agents who disapprove. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Malcolm, thank you very much for that. I've got a few questions that have come through, so we've got a couple of minutes. Let's have a crack at them. What I would like the first question is the cost of acquisition high because of technical investment or competition?
The cost of acquisition, it's high, and we could be talking about real estate or automotive, right? The cost of acquisition is high simply because buyers are going elsewhere at the moment, right? They tend to go to classified sites. And they have big brands. You know, Rightmove has a huge brand. Zillow has a massive brand. Autotrader has a massive brand. It's hard to get those eyeballs to come to a totally new and unknown platform. So that's I think the biggest challenge.
Okay, and how do you see that moving over time? How do they get that cost of acquisition down so that Carvana, as you talked about, go from losing over $1,000 per vehicle to actually making a couple $1,000 per vehicle?
So there are only two ways to do it. There's the hard way, which is to keep on raising money. And remember, there's $6 billion have been raised by the Carvanas of China, or you team up with a classifieds player that already has that traffic. Those are the two ways of doing it, in my view.
Okay. And one very last question, brief answer, please. Can you really elaborate on the detailed difference between a platform model and your own label TED?
So there is a difference. So if you are a technical broker or a technical dealer, tech-enabled dealer, you are involving you're running the process end to end yourselves, but you could be doing it with brokers and agents also on your platform. Whereas if you're a pure platform play like a Carvana or the Chinese options, there's no intermediaries at all, right? So my recommendation to classifieds players, of course, is to go to a model where you're running your own end-to-end brokerage next door to your existing clients, and that way you don't lose much of that revenue base, but you can tap into the new opportunity.
Okay, Malcolm, thank you very much. We're going to pick up on some of these themes in the panel session that comes up after the next session. So thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. It's always great to have you present at these conferences. Great work. Thank you.